So I'm going to use these size 18 Jack Rickson brushes. So I used 2 of these because if one of them got really full of paint or the wrong color eventually, or it started to dry, I need to put it in water. And I don't like using a hog bristle brush that is soaking wet, and they don't dry very quickly. So that's always have 2 brushes at least of the same size. This is going to be mainly just the cloud, just the sky in the soft cloud, how I do those backgrounds. The palette, today I'm just going to use titanium white, cyan, ultramarine, and Payne's gray. Payne's gray is my favorite color to use for clouds. I find it's such a good base. So I will be using that in every painting, almost in every palette. So I start with spraying a little bit of misting from the misting bottle, just spraying the hairs a little bit, rub it in. See, it's damp now. Very quickly, it doesn't have much left, and that's it for now. Just a bit of dampness, but it's still pretty dry. So I'm going to start with the background of the sky and then start lightening. So I'll start dark, and I'll put the final painting at the end on the side so you see how it's being built, because I don't have a reference photo. This is just how to create texture and how to get the build-up of the texture. And the palette also sprayed with the mist, so a little bit of Payne's gray, a little bit of cyan, and I'm going to start here. So already I see that this brush is very stiff, and I like that. Adding a bit more water. This studio today is very dry, so the paint is drying very quickly. Remember, when you're doing the background, always start dark and go lighter. That's mostly how skies are. So this is very, very dry. So instead of wetting the brush, I wet the paint and the palette. And I try and turn the brush around a bit. And there we go. And I'm wetting the canvas. Okay. So this is new, the brush, like I said, so I'm testing how I like it. So, okay, I'm recognizing that I need to load more paint on it. I think I sprayed too much water there. I'll let it dry. See, it has a little bit of blooming, and I don't want that, so I think I sprayed too much water. And clean rag, here we go. Just wipe that, most of it off on the clean side. So everything can be reversed. Okay. And this is the part where I'm not worried about it being too clean and too smooth. Actually, I prefer seeing different brush strokes. I don't want it smooth and perfect. So notice that I'm using a lot of circular motion, just because the clouds eventually are going to be organic roundish shapes, might as well start with the right motion right away. So this is going to be a sky full of clouds and cloud texture. So getting a little bit of white now. Again, I don't do lines. I try and keep it organic. A touch more of white. And now I'm building into that part. There we go. Soften using the side of the brush mostly to blend. I don't use the tip itself like that. It's just the side. That's why I like these brushes. They save me a step, and this way I can create what I have in mind very quickly. Little areas that are a bit lighter, a bit darker, that's all good. You're already starting now to create tonal value, and they're very, very subtle. It's not very big difference in the tonal values. Now see the shift, it's very subtle. The difference between this and that is very small. Hopefully the camera can catch that. It's already creating a soft, almost like a sky feel to it already, cloudish, cloud feel, because just a little bit of a difference. You don't need to have a blob of white to create an impression of cloud. So just dipping. See how when I dip, I'm not loading too much. It's just a few drops. Building down. So now all I'm doing is using the dirty brush with the blue on it and adding just a bit of white. Keep the circular motion. See, the water here is dirty with some Payne's Gray. So I have to be careful. If I never touch the Payne's Gray here, it'll become too chalky. So it's good to have a bit of, I dipped it in the drop of water here, and it was too watery, so it's flat here. So notice that the drier the brush, just that there's a bit of dampness to it, the more texture you get. The wetter it is, you get more flat areas. See, that was a bit wet. See how flat it becomes? See how more texture is here and there. So I'm just going to unload a bit of that water. So I'm touching the corner with the Payne's Gray, a bit of white, bit of cyan as well. See, I just kind of go up into the dark a bit, and it creates these little ghost areas. Try and remember, don't have straight, like sharp edges. Always blend into the next area to avoid hard edges. And I think that's one of the tricks that creates that depth. I'm just touching a bit of ultramarine in here, just to see how that would look. Mixing it on the side here with a bit of cyan. And now we need a touch of white and a bit of Payne's Gray in there. I think that's a bit too dull. Remember, this has a bit of red in it. This has a bit of yellow in it. They're both blue, but this leans towards the yellow on the color wheel, this leans towards the red on the color wheel. So that means there is yellow and there is red in those two when you mix them, so they become a bit more dull. And that's perfect when you want to do it on purpose. It's, as long as you know what you're mixing and understand the bias of each paint, you can create beautiful combinations. I'm just going to dip the cyan alone now with a bit of white. There we go. Bit more white, not enough white now. We need to lighten this up a bit. So the whole painting is going to be the texturizing of that sky. Again, it's not a full, complete painting, or it could be, but it's not going to have a background or, sorry, a foreground, a foreground and water or land. It's just going to be of the sky texture. So now, just adding a bit more white on the brush and blending up, not solid areas. Keep it variable, like there's variety. See, you see how I blend up into the other side, the other area? And I leave those little, areas that have a little bit of extra white there. Just little areas, not too much of them, and there will be more paint layers. See here, I don't know if it shows, let me see. Yes, it does show here, like there's two straight lines here. So easy, you can just soften them with a brush stroke that can create a little bit of, to break that line. Okay, and now because it's wet on wet still, like the layer I put down, it's still damp, I put another layer and it blends up with it. So it's blending beautifully without having hard edges. So this is more like wet on wet. You're just continuing adding while the previous paint is still damp. And I think I'm just going to not add any more blue and just keep this area here. I might change that, but for now, don't forget to quickly break those hard edges. Hard edges should be on purpose in any painting. When you do a hard edge, it should be thought through and on purpose. I try not to have something happen by mistake with a hard edge. That's why I monitor what's going on. So now you can see there's the start of a cloudy texture, very, very soft cloudy texture on a sky that's covered with clouds. I'll have to remember the name of those clouds, what they call them when they're covering the whole sky, but there's beautiful texture to them. Keep going back upwards a bit, reload. Again, every time I reload, this is what I'm loading right now. And I put it down here. I don't start there. If you notice, I start in this area and then blend up into. But when you're placing the new loaded brush, always place it a little lower and then blend up. if that's what you started from up to down. Now it's a bit too dry, the brush, and that's okay. So you can see a bit of texture here of dry brushing. And very soft, like I'm barely touching here, just enough to not have a straight line. Again, up into. And I need a bit of water. So instead of dipping the brush in the water, I dip it in those droplets. And that's enough for me, for what I'm trying to do. Try and remember that if you, like, don't get tempted to drop it in this water. This water will be soaked into the brush, and then the brush, you will lose all these textured, you know, hairs that are open and they're full of different paint colors. And as soon as you lose that, you'll get flat areas because everything will be deposited in one solid. It's easier to cover, but it's not what you want. You don't want to cover a flat area. You want to have texture, might as well, as you're building. Like I could have painted this, you know, in very soft, smooth gradients and then put the cloud on top. But that's not the style of painting I do, and that's why I find doing this now, it really eliminates like maybe 2-3 steps in trying to do this afterwards. So while doing the background, which is what I'm calling this side, like this part, I'm already building the texture that I want. Like in some paintings, this is good enough for a cloudy sky. But then you can decide, you know, what to add to it and how to define it more and more. If the painting had a very dramatic subject and the sky is just a background, you can easily use this. So far, as is, just make sure that your tonal value, definition, and positioning in the composition is correct, and you're good to go. Okay. See, I deposited, and then I'm using the side to blend. I turn the brush where there's too much white on it and use the other side to blend. So it doesn't take much, especially white. White is very chalky. Titanium white is very chalky. If you're using zinc white, it's more transparent. But titanium white can really cover. So I turn the brush now to deposit more white. I'm dipping in a drop of water here to help me blend a bit more. And I think there's some water there. See how quickly the water blends it flat? So be aware of that, not too much water. To get texture, you don't want too much water because the texture is basically leaving the different colors in chunks. The water blends them if it's too watery on the brush. Sorry, I repeat it over and over, but I think that's one of the most struggles that I have students struggle with is dipping in too much paint or too much water and then losing control. So you want to do it in small chunks with controlled movements. And that's why not too much water, not too much paint. Even you notice that not too much paint was on the brush. But you see, so far, this is looking like a decent sky.